Listen up, because this is the story galactic historians are still trying to comprehend. Humans. Just humans. In the vast, supposedly sophisticated ecosystem of interstellar civilizations, most species had developed intricate diplomatic protocols spanning millennia. The Korellian consensus had 17 different negotiation modes, depending on solar wind patterns. The Silicon Collective of Proxima b had communication algorithms so complex that translation required 3 separate quantum computers and a dedicated meditation monk. Humans? Humans had one universal protocol: problem, solution, preferably with maximum efficiency and minimal subtlety. The Galactic Archive's xenosociological records contained exactly 237 documented interactions between humans and other sentient species. Of those 237 encounters, 236 had concluded with other civilizations simultaneously impressed, terrified, and slightly traumatized. The single outlier was still classified with a notation that roughly translated to, "We do not speak of this incident." Take the Vordax Imperium, for instance, a species that had conquered 12 star systems using nothing but passive-aggressive diplomatic maneuvers and incredibly complicated social etiquette. When human diplomats first met their High Council, the Vordaxians expected a delicate dance of protocol and nuanced communication. What they got was Captain Jack Reaver. The official transcripts from that meeting were a masterpiece of understatement. "Diplomatic resolution achieved through unconventional means," the report read. What it didn't mention was how Reaver had solved a 1,000-year territorial dispute by presenting a solution so elegantly brutal that the entire Vordaxian High Council had gone silent for 3 consecutive solar cycles. Most species saw problems as complex puzzles requiring careful manipulation. Humans saw problems as obstacles to be eliminated with surgical precision, or, more frequently, overwhelming force. The Zentari Collective had a saying, "Measure 17 times, cut once." Humans apparently interpreted this as, measure once, obliterate everything in a 10-parsec radius, then ask if anyone has questions. Xenobiologists had spent decades trying to categorize human problem-solving approaches. Their research papers were filled with terms like adaptive, unpredictable, and "Dear universe, what just happened?" Most galactic scholars agreed that humans possessed a unique cognitive framework that defied traditional logical models. Some believed humans didn't actually solve problems, they more aggressively suggested alternative realities where the problem no longer existed. Take resource conflicts. Most species would negotiate, compromise, develop intricate trade agreements. Humans? They'd develop technology that made the entire resource debate irrelevant, then casually mention they'd solved the problem real quick, as if redesigning fundamental economic paradigms was equivalent to changing a light bulb. The Galactic Council had an entire subsection dedicated to unexpected human interventions. It was less a diplomatic record and more a collection of incidents that made seasoned bureaucrats wake up in cold sweats. Rumors spread through interstellar communication networks, whispers of a species that viewed impossible as a mild suggestion, a civilization that treated complex geopolitical challenges like an afternoon puzzle, and global conflicts like an inconvenient math problem waiting to be solved. And at the center of these legends stood individuals like Jack Reaver, humans who didn't just think outside the box, they were unaware the box even existed. The galaxy watched, the galaxy wondered, and the galaxy, if it was completely honest, was simultaneously terrified and weirdly fascinated. Because humans were coming, and they were going to solve everything, whether the universe was ready or not. The USS Diplomatic Hammer wasn't exactly a name that inspired confidence in traditional galactic peacekeeping circles. Most diplomatic vessels were sleek, minimalist affairs with neutral color schemes and communication arrays that could whisper complex negotiations across star systems. This ship looked like someone had taken a battlecruiser, slapped on some diplomatic insignia, and called it a day. Captain Jack Reaver sat in his command chair, which was more accurately described as a modified combat seat with additional padding and a built-in coffee dispenser. His current mission: negotiate a territorial dispute between the Korellian Confederacy and the Orion Trading Consortium. a conflict that had been simmering for approximately 127 standard years. "Sir," his AI assistant chirped, "the preliminary communication protocols suggest we should approach this with extreme delicacy." Jack took a long swig of coffee. It was his 7th cup, and the brew was so strong it could potentially be classified as a chemical weapon in at least 3 star systems. "Delicacy," he muttered, "is for diplomats who enjoy watching problems fester." Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, his second-in-command, tried not to smile. She'd served with Jack long enough to know that his version of diplomacy made most galactic negotiators break out in stress hives. The mission briefing was a masterpiece of bureaucratic complexity. 2 alien species, each claiming ownership of a resource-rich star system that was essentially a cosmic wasteland. The Korellians believed the system contained ancient artifacts of immense cultural significance. The Orion Consortium was convinced it held untapped mineral resources worth several trillion galactic credits. Both were technically correct, and both were spectacularly missing the point. Jack pulled up the holographic star charts, his fingers dancing across the projection with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent more time solving problems with creative violence than traditional negotiation. "Maya," he said, not looking up, "what's the standard diplomatic approach to this kind of standoff?" She recited from memory. "Establish communication channels, validate cultural claims, create a joint investigative committee, develop a comprehensive shared governance model that respects both parties' historical and economic interests." Jack nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. "Or," he said, "we could solve this in about 3 hours." The ship's AI made a sound that was remarkably close to a digital sigh. "Captain, your definition of solving typically involves solutions that make galactic peacekeeping committees spontaneously develop ulcers." Jack Reaver was not a large man, standing about 5'10", with the lean, muscular build of someone who believed physical fitness was a form of problem-solving. His dark hair was perpetually slightly disheveled, and he had eyes that suggested he found most universal challenges mildly amusing. His service record was a masterpiece of controlled chaos, commendations nestled against disciplinary notes, brilliant strategic maneuvers documented right next to reports of unconventional conflict resolution. The Korellian ambassador's preliminary communication had been a 783-page document detailing their ancestral claim to the disputed system. Jack had read it while drinking his morning coffee, making annotations in the margins that were equal parts brilliant and borderline insulting. "Their entire argument," he told Maya, "is basically a really long-winded way of saying we were here first." Maya knew better than to interrupt. Jack was assembling a solution in real time, the way other people might assemble a sandwich. "Prepare communication protocols," he announced, "but not the standard ones, the fun ones." The ship's AI made what could only be described as a digital groan. "By fun, you mean potentially causing an interstellar incident?" "I mean efficiently resolving a century-old conflict," Jack corrected, "with minimal paperwork and maximum results." As the USS Diplomatic Hammer approached the designated negotiation coordinates, one thing was certain. Whatever was about to happen, it would not be found in any diplomatic training manual. And the galaxy was about to get another lesson in human problem-solving. The Korellian diplomatic vessel looked like an architectural nightmare designed by someone who believed symmetry was a crime against art. Multiple crystalline protrusions jutted out at impossible angles, giving the impression that the ship was simultaneously trying to impress and threaten anyone who looked at it. Jack studied the holographic readout. "Interesting design," he muttered. "Looks like something you'd get if a jellyfish and a cathedral had a very complicated relationship." Lieutenant Rodriguez suppressed a laugh. "Diplomatic communication incoming, sir." The view screen flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Krell of the Korellian Confederacy. Imagine a sentient octopus wearing an elaborate bureaucratic uniform, with tentacles that seemed to move independently while simultaneously managing multiple communication devices. Each tentacle appeared to be multitasking, one scrolling through documents, another adjusting an elaborate communication pendant, a third dramatically gesturing for emphasis. "Greetings, human diplomatic vessel," Krell began, his voice a melodic combination of clicks, whistles, and what sounded suspiciously like passive-aggressive bureaucratic terminology. "We appreciate your presence in this delicate matter of territorial negotiation." Jack took another swig of coffee. "Appreciated," he responded, which was neither confirmation nor denial, a linguistic trick he'd perfected over years of interstellar diplomacy. Quell's tentacles twitched. Humans were notoriously difficult to read, and this one seemed particularly unpredictable. The ambassador had spent decades preparing for this negotiation. 17 different communication protocols, 43 potential negotiation scenarios, backup plans for his backup plans. What he hadn't prepared for was Captain Jack Reaver. "Before we begin formal discussions," Korell continued, "I must present our preliminary documentation regarding our ancestral claim to the Nexus Gamma system. It is a mere 2,347-page initial overview, which I'm certain you'll find most illuminating." Jack's AI assistant helpfully projected the document. Maya watched her captain's eyes scan the entire thing in approximately 47 seconds. "That's impressive," she whispered. "Nah," Jack muttered. "I just look for the important parts, kind of like finding the toy in a cereal box." The Korellian ambassador continued his elaborate presentation, each tentacle contributing to an increasingly complex narrative about cultural heritage, astronomical positioning, and historical significance. It was less a negotiation and more a performance art piece about bureaucratic complexity. Jack listened, and then did something completely unexpected. "How about," he interrupted, "we solve this right now?" Korell's tentacles froze mid-gesture. In thousands of years of galactic diplomacy, no one had ever suggested solving anything immediately. Negotiations were supposed to be intricate dances of protocol, paperwork, and prolonged discussions. "I beg your pardon?" Korell's translator suggested total confusion. "The system," Jack said, pulling up a holographic star chart. "You want it for cultural reasons. The Orion Consortium wants mineral rights. Both of you are correct. So, here's my solution." What followed was a proposal so elegantly simple and simultaneously so audacious that it would be discussed in diplomatic circles for generations. Jack proposed a joint research and development colony, not just a sharing arrangement but a complete collaborative effort where Korellian cultural researchers would work alongside Orion mining engineers, complete resource and knowledge sharing, mutual governance, a system where both parties would benefit, not just economically, but scientifically. Korell's tentacles did something that, in Korellian biology, was the equivalent of a jaw drop. That's not how negotiations work," the ambassador sputtered. Jack grinned. "Worked for us." And just like that, a 127-year conflict was potentially resolved in less time than it took most species to draft their opening statements. The universe watched. And somewhere, diplomatic training manuals spontaneously combusted. The moment Jack's proposal hit the official communication channels, the galaxy collectively held its breath. The Orion Trading Consortium's response was predictably bureaucratic. Their lead negotiator, a cybernetic being named Pulse 7, sent a communication that was 90% legal disclaimers and 10% actual content. The holographic message flickered with so many legal caveats that it looked like it might spontaneously combust from its own complexity. "We require additional clarification," Pulse 7 stated, its voice a perfect monotone that suggested absolute neutrality was an art form. "Specifically regarding subsection 7.3 paragraph gamma regarding resource extraction protocols and cultural preservation methodologies." Jack looked at Maya. "Translation?" Maya grinned. "They're saying no in the most complicated way possible." The USS Diplomatic Hammer wasn't just a ship. It was a carefully designed instrument of human problem-solving that defied traditional galactic expectations. Its weapon systems were technically diplomatic communication arrays. Its defensive shields could block everything from plasma torpedoes to bureaucratic red tape. "Prepare contingency protocols," Jack announced, "but not the standard ones." The ship's AI made a sound suspiciously close to a chuckle. "Define standard, Captain." Jack pulled up a holographic display that was part star chart, part strategic overlay, and part what could only be described as a creative problem-solving diagram. To any other species, it would look like organized chaos. To Jack, it was a perfectly logical solution. Lieutenant Rodriguez recognized that look. It was the same look he'd had during the Proxima conflict, the Centauri standoff, and that one memorable incident involving 3 mining colonies, a misunderstanding about agricultural regulations, and a surprisingly effective use of industrial-grade cheese. "Sir," she said carefully, "your solution typically involves approaches that make diplomatic committees develop spontaneous migraines." Jack was already in motion. The ship's internal systems began reconfiguring. Diplomatic communication arrays shifted, sensor packages realigned. What looked like random adjustments were actually a meticulously planned approach that would make most strategic planners weep. Post 7's next communication arrived, another 2,000-word document that essentially said no with increasing levels of bureaucratic complexity. Jack read it in 17 seconds. "They want a formal negotiation," he announced. "Full diplomatic summit, multiple representatives, extensive preliminary discussions." Maya knew what was coming. "And your plan is?" "To be surprisingly efficient," Jack grinned. The preparation was nothing short of extraordinary. While most diplomatic missions would spend months preparing exhaustive documentation, the USS Diplomatic Hammer was assembling a solution that was part negotiation, part strategic intervention, and part what could only be described as organized chaos. Jack pulled up historical data. The Nexus Gamma system wasn't just a territorial dispute, it was a microcosm of galactic political complexity. The Korellians believed it contained ancient cultural artifacts. The Orion Consortium was convinced it held mineral resources worth trillions. Both were correct, and both were missing the larger point. "We're not just solving a territorial dispute," Jack explained to Maya. "We're demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to problem solving." The ship's systems hummed. Diplomatic communication arrays recalibrated, sensor packages that could detect everything from mineral deposits to subtle diplomatic nuances began their complex dance of preparation. Pole 7 would receive another communication. But this wouldn't be a standard diplomatic response. This would be a human-style solution that would make galactic bureaucrats simultaneously impressed and terrified. The universe was about to get another masterclass in human problem-solving. And Jack Reaver was just getting started. The diplomatic summit was supposed to be a controlled environment, neutral space station, carefully choreographed seating arrangements, translators calibrated to catch every nuanced diplomatic whisper. What it became was a masterclass in human problem-solving. Jack arrived with exactly 3 things: a holographic presentation, a data drive that looked suspiciously simple, and a thermos of coffee so strong it could potentially be classified as a controlled substance in at least 12 star systems. The assembled delegates represented the pinnacle of galactic bureaucratic evolution. The Korellian ambassador Krell, with his multiple tentacles, each seemingly capable of independent thought. Pulse 7 from the Orion Consortium, a cybernetic being whose very existence was a mathematical equation of efficiency. Representatives from no less than 7 galactic oversight committees, each more bureaucratically complex than the last. They expected a lengthy negotiation, months of discussions, layers of legal documentation, endless procedural debates. Jack had other plans. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of indeterminate classification," he began, "let's solve this." The universal translator worked overtime. What should have been a complex diplomatic statement came out as the most straightforward proposal in galactic negotiation history. The holographic display came to life. It wasn't just a presentation. It was a complete solution that rendered the entire 127-year conflict obsolete. Jack's proposal did something revolutionary. It didn't just divide the resources, it transformed them entirely. The Nexus Gamma system contained both cultural artifacts and mineral resources. Traditional negotiation would involve endless debates about ownership, extraction rights, cultural preservation. Jack's solution was elegantly brutal in its simplicity. Complete and total collaborative development. a joint research colony, full resource sharing, advanced technology that would allow simultaneous cultural preservation and resource extraction. The Korellians would get their archaeological research, the Orion Consortium would get their mineral rights, and both would gain something far more valuable: technological advancement and mutual cooperation. Ambassador Krell's tentacles froze in a gesture of complete shock. Pulse 7. Cybernetic systems actually seemed to temporarily stutter. "That's not how negotiations work," Krell sputtered. Jack grinned. "Works for humans." The data drive he presented wasn't just a proposal, it was a complete blueprint. Detailed plans for a collaborative colony, technology designs that solved problems neither species had even considered, economic models that made traditional resource allocation look like child's play. Most diplomatic negotiations involved compromise. This was complete transformation. Pulse 7 ran initial calculations. The economic benefits were astronomical. The technological potential was beyond anything in current galactic models. What Jack proposed wasn't just a solution to a territorial dispute. It was a fundamental reimagining of interstellar cooperation. "This is impossible," one of the Oversight Committee representatives muttered. Jack took a slow sip of his coffee. "Impossible is just a word humans use to describe things we haven't solved yet." The room went silent. The proposal did something extraordinary. It didn't just resolve the conflict. It made the entire conflict irrelevant. The Nexus Gamma system went from a point of contention to a potential beacon of collaborative innovation. Maya, standing slightly behind Jack, tried not to smile. This was classic Reaver. Solved the problem so completely that the problem ceased to exist. Ambassador Krell's translator caught something that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Pulse 7 systems began running increasingly complex simulations, each one confirming the absolute brilliance of the proposed solution. Jack wasn't just negotiating. He was rewriting the rules of galactic interaction, and he was doing it before lunch. The universe watched. And somewhere, diplomatic textbooks spontaneously combusted. 6 months after the Nexus Gamma resolution, the galactic communication networks were still buzzing. The collaborative research colony wasn't just a success. It was a phenomenon that defied every established diplomatic model. Korellian cultural researchers worked alongside Orion mining engineers with a level of cooperation that made previous interstellar collaborations look like kindergarten squabbles. The first reports came in and they were nothing short of revolutionary. In the first 3 months alone, the joint colony had discovered 3 previously unknown archaeological sites, developed a mineral extraction technology that reduced environmental impact by 87%, created a communication protocol that could potentially revolutionize cross-species interactions. Jack Reaver, meanwhile, was enjoying a well-deserved coffee break. "Another diplomatic miracle?" Maya asked, her voice dripping with sardonic amusement. Jack shrugged. "Just solving problems." The Galactic Council's official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. 17 pages that essentially said, humans did something unexpected and it worked spectacularly. Ambassador Krell had become something of a celebrity. His tentacles were now featured in diplomatic training videos across multiple star systems, a living example of how unexpected collaboration could transform centuries-old conflict. Pulse 7, the Orion Consortium's lead negotiator, had been upgraded with what analysts were calling a human interaction module, a diplomatic enhancement that essentially translated to think outside the established parameters. But the real story was happening on the Nexus Gamma colony. Korellian archaeologists discovered artifact technologies that completely redefined understanding of ancient galactic civilizations. Orion engineers developed extraction methods so efficient and environmentally friendly that they were being studied by environmental councils across multiple star systems. The colony became a beacon of hope, a living example that conflicts weren't meant to be managed, but solved. "You realize," the ship's AI told Jack one quiet morning, "that you've essentially rewritten galactic diplomatic protocols?" Jack took another sip of coffee. "Just doing my job." But it was more than that. Humans had always been different. Where other species saw barriers, humans saw challenges. Where others saw impossible, humans saw not yet solved. The Nexus Gamma resolution became a case study. Diplomatic academies across the galaxy began incorporating what they now called the Reaver approach, a method of problem-solving that was equal parts audacity, creativity, and sheer human determination. Jack received commendations, lots of them, each more elaborate than the last. He used most of them as coffee coasters. Maya found him one afternoon, reviewing the latest colony reports. "Thinking about the next impossible problem to solve?" she asked. Jack grinned. "Always." The truly terrifying thing about humans, the galaxy was learning, wasn't their technology, it wasn't their military might, it was their fundamental inability to accept that something couldn't be solved. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other species were taking notes, watching, learning. The Nexus Gamma colony stood as a testament, a shining example of what happens when you approach a problem not with fear or complexity, but with a simple, fundamental belief. Every problem has a solution. You just have to be crazy enough to find it. And humans? Humans were always crazy enough. Jack Reaver finished his coffee and looked out at the stars. Another day, another impossible problem waiting to be solved. Just another day in human diplomacy.